Tonight, pills, pills, and more pills. Prescription drugs, easy to get, all in the name of pain.
Back pain, neck pain. Everyone who goes to that clinic would basically come out with the same prescription. Whether that pain was legitimate or not, there's no way to detect.
Hardcore narcotics, also easy to abuse.
Cause of death was combined drug toxicity from the exact 3 drugs that had been prescribed by this clinic.
And they were?
Vicodin, Soma, and Xanax. Those 3 and only those 3.
And an experiment in easing traffic congestion at one of the busiest intersections in the world.
This used to be Broadway. We would be standing in 3 lanes of traffic here, and all of this now is available for pedestrians.
We'll bring you the news next on Dan Rather Reports. Good evening. Dan Rather reporting tonight from Austin. We begin the program with an investigation of pain management clinics here in Texas and elsewhere. Millions of Americans suffer from chronic pain, and the demand has created a booming industry of legitimate pain management clinics across the country. But laws here in Texas and some other states allow prescription drugs, potentially dangerous but legal narcotics, to be prescribed in clinics without a doctor on site. And lack of a prescription drug monitoring program for all narcotic categories has led to drug distribution in parts of the state on a scale never before seen by police. For decades, the war on drugs has focused on drug trafficking from Mexico, Central and South America. But the battle lines here and in other states have been redrawn. No longer is it the border, but the neighborhood pharmacy. And the drugs are legal, FDA approved.
Here's a couple here.
These are only a few of countless prescription pills that the Houston, Texas Police Department has seized in recent years.
These were sold for pennies on the dollar to an undercover officer, at which time he was arrested. I think there was approximately 10,000 tablets.
According to the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, nearly 7 million Americans are abusing prescription drugs. That's more than the number who abuse heroin, cocaine, ecstasy, and hallucinogens combined. Here in Houston, police say loopholes in the law have made it all too easy for just about anyone to legally get their hands on prescription painkillers. From addicts who need a fix to dealers who turn around and sell them for profit on the street. Where are they getting these pills? Pain relief centers that, according to veteran police officer John Kowal, aren't all operating with the highest of medical standards.
There are legitimate pain control centers.
Oh yes, we have pain clinics in Houston that are run by board-certified anesthesiologists that do a complete workup of your personal medical history and what would be best to keep you functioning just on pain medication legitimately.
But that's not what you work on.
Correct. It's going to be right on here on your left. You'll see the sign for the pain relief center right there.
There it is. South Kirby Pain Relief
Right.
Center.
He calls these places pill mills.
If you're not here to see the doctor or go to the pharmacy, you need to leave. All right. Now. Okay.
They're often found in strip malls or embedded in nondescript, out-of-the-way buildings. Mom-and-pop pharmacies and clinics working hand in hand, giving out potentially addictive narcotics without asking very many questions.
For people who don't know what a pill mill is, take us through.
The basic definition here in Houston, Harris County, Texas, is usually a storefront operation where people go to get prescription drugs, a prescription for controlled substances. These pain clinics, or pill mills as they're referred to, don't have to be owned or operated right now by a licensed medical doctor. They could be owned by a layperson.
Do I have to be licensed by the city?
No.
Licensed by the county?
No.
Licensed by the state?
No.
Any federal license required?
None whatsoever.
So it's a business like a 7-Eleven or a hot dog stand?
Exactly. It's just like any of you were going to open up a shoe store. There's no licensing requirement as of right now.
Wow.
A lot of them, what we see from the people we arrested from owning these clinics, are your former crack or cocaine dealers from the 80s or 90s who are now getting into the pill business as an illicit commodity.
Because the prescription pill business is a better business, more money, or?
It's more money, and you got less overhead. That's not have to be imported from Colombia or Mexico or come across the border. It's manufactured here right in the United States.
According to Kowal, this is not your typical doctor's office. All you need to get powerful prescription narcotics are identification and some aches and pains.
Whether that pain was legitimate or not, there's no way to detect. Usually like a back pain, neck pain, they would give you a limited or basic medical exam as far as where you hurt, how did you do it, and then everyone who goes to that clinic would basically come out with the same prescription, and that's it. Here you got a little van, a Suburban on your right. People in it just waiting to go to the pharmacy, coming out of the pharmacy.
We asked Police Officer Kowal to give us a ride-along so we could observe for ourselves.
Well, the pain relief center is here, and the
Right.
pharmacy is right next door. Very handy.
To see how these so-called pill mills really work, you have to show up early in the morning. This clinic won't open for at least another hour, but the line has already started forming. It's first come, first serve. Cash only. No credit cards, no insurance. Some show up with coupons like these that give them a discount on their visit. On an average day, roughly 100 people will file through these doors. Some of them suffer from chronic, debilitating pain. They may not have insurance or the money to see a specialist, and this type of clinic is the only place for them. But they likely will be joined by desperate addicts, regulars who walk in frequently knowing they can get their pill fix without much hassle. And then there are the dealers, who bring people in by the carload to help stock up on their inventory. Many of the cars are from neighboring states where the laws are more stringent than in Texas.
There's a car from Louisiana right there, just waiting, two of them in a row. You see that car right there getting out 3 at a time.
Right.
This management has hired security to keep these people in their vehicles. You won't draw as much attention if everybody's not sitting inside the pharmacy or right outside the pharmacy. There's a group coming out of the pharmacy. And this is a Louisiana car right here. The standard prescription that you're issued at one of the pain clinics that we're talking about is 120 tablets of hydrocodone and 90 tablets of Soma, the muscle relaxant, and 60 tablets usually of the Xanax.
Each tablet is worth about how much on the street?
Well, it starts here in Houston about $3 to $4. Louisiana maybe about $5 to $7, somewhere in that area.
So we're talking real money.
Right. And you're talking about thousands of pills.
Most of these pills are synthetic pain relievers, officially called opioids, drugs in the same family as morphine and oxycodone. Hydrocodone, also known as Vicodin or Lortab, is popular here. Xanax, an addictive anti-anxiety medication, and the muscle relaxer Soma are also generously prescribed.
Who's behind this? Who makes the money?
There's money to be made all throughout the process. You have the clinic owner who's charging somebody $75 for a visit.
Who may or may not be a so-called, quote, dirty doctor?
Correct. You have a doctor or a medical director for that clinic that's by law supposed to review approximately 10% of the patient charts. He gets paid a monthly salary. That's pretty good, anywhere from $5,000 to $7,000 per month just to come in once in a while and review those charts. So he gets his money.
There's money in it, too, for the independent pharmacies who specialize in selling drugs to people referred from pill mills.
How many of these bad clinics do you think there are?
You're looking at about 200 clinics, and that's just from a rough estimate of what we see on the streets, information we've gathered.
And that's in Houston and the metropolitan Houston
That's
area?
just within the metropolitan Houston area. The further you go out through Harris County, you may see a top of anywhere to up to 300 or so.
Travel about an hour east outside of Houston, and you'll find yourself close to the Louisiana border. They call this region the Golden Triangle, encompassing Beaumont, Port Arthur, and Orange, Texas. In 1901, they struck oil here, a 100-foot-tall gusher that lasted for 9 days and started the oil boom, bringing wealth to the area. That's where the term golden comes from. But the heydays of the early 1900s ended long ago. Now, battered by the economy and weather-beaten by Mother Nature, much of that luster has faded. Narcotics, both legal and illegal, flow freely throughout the depressed cities and towns of East Texas, and many of the products that hit the streets are coming from pill mills. The human cost has been tragically high. In 2007 alone, officials told us there were over 100 deaths from prescription drug overdoses, and each one has a story.
He loved that motorcycle. That was, man, he worked on that thing and worked on that thing and worked on that thing. And of course, after, he was gone, well, we, obviously there's not enough money in the world to buy it.
Ken Scarborough and his wife Esther thought of themselves as a typical family. Their eldest child, their only son, Christopher, was fun and outgoing. He enjoyed spending times with friends and family. His father says he was the kind of kid who was never afraid to tell him, "I love you," even in public. For his mother, life seemed to be going normally throughout his early years.
Well, most parents at some point have a talk with their children about sex and about watching out for drugs. Did you have that conversation with him?
Yes, we did, many times. Sometimes I think, and when he was younger, we may have overdone it, piqued the curiosity or something like that. They have classes for kids to teach them about what drugs to stay away from. And I remember one time he told me that class made him think more about trying it.
Do you remember the first time you knew he got high?
It was his 17th birthday, and he had gone down the street. We lived out in the country, and he'd gone down the street to a friend's house, and one of the family members gave him 2 Xanax and a beer for his 17th birthday, and that night he spent his birthday in jail because he was so high that we had to call for help to control him, and they just took him up there to let him calm down that night.
It was easy for Chris, who was popular and charismatic, to score drugs from his friends and convince others it was all just a phase.
I work in a juvenile facility, and we had kids coming in there, doing things, and you think, well, my kid won't ever do that. I can remember saying that many times, my kid won't do anything like that. And it happened, and still, I think a lot of times I denied knowing or thinking that he would, be that much involved with it.
Well, you wouldn't be the first parent.
No, I know that now for sure.
From that 17 when he first experimented with the beer and the Xanax, and as he got older and started progressing, he got to where at some point he knew that he had the addiction. He knew that he had it, and he hated it. He hated it.
I loved that child so much that I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt.
His parents say Chris checked himself into rehab treatment twice, but the temptations were always there. Peer pressure and pals with pills, and yes, his own weaknesses. Back in Houston, we wanted to see for ourselves how easy it is to get these types of drugs. 3 of our reporters, each going to a clinic only once, were able to buy all of these. All of our reporters used out-of-state IDs, which presented no problems. They just had to fill out a little paperwork, say they were in pain, ranking it on a scale of 1 to 10. Each was given signed prescriptions and directions to a nearby pharmacy with assurances that those prescriptions would be filled. The total, 600 pills, mostly powerful muscle relaxers and painkillers, easily enough for a deadly overdose, or big profits when marked up on the streets. It may surprise you to know, according to the DEA, that narcotic painkillers now cause more drug overdose deaths than cocaine and heroin combined.
I just think it's a big problem, and it's a problem that a lot of people aren't aware of, but it's happening everywhere. And before, I would just like to see something done about it before anybody else, loses someone as important to them as he was to me.
Jessica is Chris Scarborough's baby sister. She's still haunted by a day in September of 2007. Just 5 days earlier, her older brother had walked into a pill mill.
I got it about a month after Chris died. It's just a broken heart with the date of his death. He died on the 23rd, and I came in from Austin on the 22nd. And we all went out to dinner and, had a good time and just joking around, laughing, and he was just same old Chris. And that night, next morning, he just didn't wake up. So I was glad that I got to spend that last night with him,
The paramedics shocked him and it didn't work, and then they shocked him again and it didn't work. And they said they couldn't do it anymore, and I said, oh, please just try one more time. And just didn't work. And we found out later that his heart had slowed so much that his lungs just filled up with fluid from the medicine. And till to this day, it just seems like it's just a nightmare. No mother should have to try to revive their child.
Christopher Scarborough was 25 years old.
Cause of death was combined drug toxicity from the exact 3 drugs that had been prescribed by this clinic.
And they were?
Vicodin, Soma, and Xanax. Those 3 and only those 3.
Was that one of the bottles?
That's one of the bottles. That's a bottle that big. Mm-hmm. In my view, would be no different than if he had gone to the doctor and said, I'm just a little depressed. I'm depressed and I don't really know what I want to do. Instead of giving pills, the doctor would say, well, I'll tell you what, just go ahead and take this pistol and these 6 bullets and go out to the shooting range and make yourself feel better. Just do a little target practice. $360 pills.
It says take 1 tablet by mouth 4 times daily. And this is
hydrocodone. That's the Vicodin. Mm-hmm. And that bottle was full.
A lot of pills.
So we know there are bad doctors, and the bona fide medical community wants to work with the regulatory and law enforcement community to stop those doctors.
Dr. Russell Portnoy is chairman of the Department of Pain Medicine and Palliative Care at Beth Israel Medical Center in New York. He says the majority of doctors take their ethical responsibility seriously and says these medications, while subject to abuse, are also a godsend for millions of Americans who suffer from real chronic pain, many of whom, he says, are undertreated.
Here we have a group of medications that are incredibly powerful and the best we have to relieve pain. But we know that some people who get these drugs will become addicted to them, lose control, develop compulsive use, and continue to use them even though they produce great harm. So that's the great challenge, trying to decide who should have access to these drugs that can be of such great benefit, but also carry very significant risk.
And for those reasons, he says, responsible doctors would rarely give the most powerful pain medications to a patient on a first visit, adding that any mixing of drugs should always be under careful supervision.
That kind of combination therapy is absolutely fine when it's administered by somebody who knows what he or she is doing. Typically, the drugs are added one at a time so that you can judge the effect before adding the next one. And even as each one is added, the overall regimen has to be reevaluated, and if it's not working for the patient in terms of benefit over risk, the regimen has to be stopped or changed.
The Drug Enforcement Administration says that doctor involvement in illegal drug activity is rare. Less than 1% of more than 750,000 doctors have come under investigation. Many states have strict regulations about who can prescribe these drugs. Texas isn't one of them.
The pain management clinics are really legitimate. There are a lot of good ones in the state. We want those guys to be able to keep practicing, but we want to hang out the "you're not welcome" sign for the pill mills.
Texas State Senator Tommy Williams' district lies within the pill mill hotbed of southeast Texas.
Just in 2 of the 6 counties I represent, in 2006, we had over 100 deaths from prescription drug overdoses.
After emotional testimony from both law enforcement and bereaved families, including the Scarboroughs, Williams proposed 2 laws that he says will make it difficult for pill mills to function the way they do.
It sailed through 142-0 in the House and 31-0 in the Senate.
Clinics will have to be owned and operated by licensed physicians in Texas and up for review every 2 years. Under this law, Texas would also add all categories of narcotics to a database that tracks prescriptions for drugs like the ones distributed by pill mills. This will make it more difficult for any one individual to fill multiple prescriptions in a period of less than 30 days.
What I would hope to tell you is that we've shut them down in Texas and there aren't any pill mills operating anymore.
Small steps. I mean, we'll take what we can get.
Police Officer John Kowal fears addicts will continue to get their fix unless there's a change in how the drugs themselves are classified.
Nurse practitioners, physician's assistants could not then issue those prescriptions. Only a licensed medical doctor could. If the pharmaceutical companies, the lobbying associations, the medical societies would get behind us and say, yeah, let's try it and see what happens, I think we might see a marked decrease in the number of emergency room visits from people overdosing.
I have one here from a father that says, I would like to take this time to write you.
Since they told their story before the Texas legislature, the Scarboroughs have been overwhelmed by the number of emails that have been pouring in. This has motivated them to set up an organization to assist others like themselves, Parents Against Prescription Drug Abuse. They hope it can help others before it's too late.
I mean, right now, as we sit here tonight, right now, there's a family somewhere, I promise you, there's a family somewhere. Tomorrow, next day, maybe the next 72 hours, their child is not going to wake up. They don't know it yet. They don't know it yet. But their child is not going to wake up. He or she is happy and healthy right now, but they're not going to wake up. And the reason they're not going to wake up is because they cross paths with a dirty doctor and a dirty pharmacist.
The clinic and the pharmacy where Christopher Scarborough got his pills were shut down. The doctor who oversaw the clinic is still practicing medicine, but currently cannot prescribe prescription painkillers. In a moment, so many drugs and now so many victims. Meet an attorney who is not just going after the clinics, but the pharmacies and the companies that supply them. So stay here with us. Missed an edition of Dan Rather Reports? Or just want to see one again? We're now available on iTunes, so check us out. Welcome back to Austin. Here in Texas, it's been difficult to prosecute the so-called dirty doctors and pharmacists who keep the pill mill system running, leaving what families of overdose victims feel is little, if any, justice. So now, a conversation with Kay Van Way, a Dallas attorney representing some of those families. Her mission, she says, is to make sure that someone is held accountable, even if it means going all the way to the top.
Imagine going into your doctor and saying, I've got a backache and my nerves are bothering me and I'd like 120 Vicodin and 60 muscle relaxers and 120 Xanax. Most of our doctors, who are good doctors, would look at us as if we had lost our minds. And in Chris Scarborough's case, a 25-year-old young man, to walk into a pain clinic in a strip shopping center, you don't have to be a really sophisticated person to say that doesn't pass the smell test.
When you go into the clinics, nobody gives you a thorough physical examination. Nobody gives you a diagnostic examination. It's basically you say, my back hurts or my neck hurts, and they prescribe. Is that not the case?
If the clinic is seeing 80 to 100 to 120 patients a day, there's not time to get any information from the patient other than, what do you want? There's no time to perform a physical examination or to read medical records to see what the true nature of their problem is or whether they have one.
Well, the doctors who are associated with these pill mills, quote, pain clinics, you think by and large they know what they're doing?
I think there's two varieties of doctors that get caught up in these sorts of things. I think there's a doctor who is perhaps poorly trained, misinformed, and who just doesn't have very tight controls on the controlled substances that go out of their door. I think there's another kind of doctor who knows darn good and well what they're doing, and they go into it with the mindset of just running as many people through the clinic as they possibly can and writing them prescriptions for whatever they ask for, whether they need it or not.
Now let's turn to the pharmacists. Most pharmacists I know are very well trained, integrity filled. What about the pharmacists involved in these kinds of operations?
Well, there are different varieties of pharmacists as well, and I agree with you that there are many who are well trained and conscientious. There are some who are good business people who decide that there is a market for these drugs. And if they fill one questionable prescription on Monday, then on Tuesday there will be 5 people from the same clinic at their door, mostly cash-paying people. If they fill those 5, by Wednesday there will be 15 people there. By Thursday there will be 30, and by Friday there will be 50.
You seem to emphasize that they be cash customers. Where does that fit into the equation? Because you have to report it on your taxes, or do you?
Well, I think that remains to be seen.
Now let's go up the chain to the wholesalers. The wholesalers know, they can see on where they're putting the drugs.
Right.
Suddenly it spikes up at a pharmacy that just happens to be next door to the clinic or just down the street from the clinic. You think they know what they're doing?
Well, the distributors are supposed to have plans in place, a program in place for monitoring these things. The DEA has put it on the backs of the distributors to know who their customers are. And the DEA has made it known that they're going to hold the distributors responsible if they're distributing to a pharmacy that's filling pill mill prescriptions. And so many of the larger wholesalers have implemented programs where they go and photograph the pharmacy. They determine where it's located. Is it located within the confines of an oncology clinic, or is it just a little mom and pop pharmacy out in the middle of nowhere that's distributing off the chart amounts of painkillers and muscle relaxers and things like that?
Now let's carry it up to the ultimate top of the pyramid with the big pharmaceutical companies. Do they know what's happening, what's really happening in the pharmaceutical companies?
Well, sure they do. I mean, they're in the business of selling pills, and they know who their customers are as well. They have a very intricate database so that they know exactly, even down to the level of the doctor, which doctors are their better prescribers. And they employ a very sophisticated sales force to make sure that the sales are optimized and that the physicians understand why drug A is better than drug B.
Let me play devil's advocate for a moment. I'm the CEO of a big pharmaceutical company. Say, what happens to these pills once we manufacture them, once we distribute them? It's not my business. To that you would say what?
Well, I think they also, if I may, I think what they also say is we do great things for people. And I don't doubt that they do. Some of these drugs do help people who genuinely need them. There's no doubt about that. But these pharmaceutical executives also want to lay it on the backs of the individual by saying this is a problem created by individuals who are out to trick these doctors into prescribing things.
But if I'm a business person, I say with all respect, I'm not a policeman. I'm not in the police business. Again, madam, I'm in business here to make money. And thank you very much. Our business is going quite well.
Well, that's fine if you're selling cars or washing machines. But when you're selling dangerous prescription drugs who are killing people, and when we have a prescription drug epidemic in this country where, I can't cite the statistic to you right now, but there are millions of people in this country who are currently addicted to prescription drugs.
You used the phrase, we have a prescription drug epidemic. Do we, or is that an overstatement?
More people are addicted to prescription drugs in the United States than are addicted to cocaine, heroin, or methamphetamines, and other drugs. Prescription drug addiction is second only to marijuana, and I would submit that it deserves more attention because people aren't dying of marijuana overdoses. But every single day in this country, many people are dying of prescription drug overdoses. It's not a celebrity problem, and it's not the bum living under the bridge problem either. These are our teachers and our mothers and our children. These are ordinary Americans. But we've all been raised on this notion that pills are good for us, and people wouldn't manufacture them and doctors wouldn't prescribe them if they weren't good for us. And we've become a pill-popping society. You know, some have referred to us as Generation RX because there's a pill for everything.
But there remains that question, well, what about the patients and their own personal responsibility? We're a country that believes in personal responsibility. And doesn't the blame for this really start with the people who take the pills?
I, too, believe in personal responsibility. But even the medical community recognizes that drug addiction is a medical disease. Let me just use an example. I know it is wrong to draw more money out of my bank account than I know is in there. I shouldn't write a check if I know I don't have the money to cover it. But if I had a criminal holding a gun at my head and saying, draw money out of that ATM, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get the money. The addiction is the criminal holding the gun at your head and making good people do things that they ordinarily wouldn't do.
You meet with clients, people who feel that they've lost loved ones, they're obviously depressed, but they're also angry. What's your advice to clients?
Well, there's a lot of people that I can't help. Many of these pill mills are run by some pretty shady people who we can't even find to serve a subpoena on them or to serve them with lawsuit papers. And then we have the situation with the pharmacist where they say, well, it's really the doctor's responsibility to make sure that the prescription is legitimate and all we do is fill prescriptions and so on and so forth down the line. But I'm just shocked by how many people are sitting on the sidelines wringing their hands and saying, well, it's too difficult. There's nothing that can be done about it.
Let's talk about accountability. Is Congress and the regulatory agencies doing the job on these cases and with this situation that they should be doing?
Absolutely not. The problem is continuing to escalate, and many of these pill mills, as I call them, are operating right under the noses of law enforcement. And we have legislation. I hear calls, well, we need more legislation. Well, we need to form a committee. Well, we need more collaboration. But the truth of the matter is that the laws have been on the books for over 90 years. It is illegal to divert a controlled substance for anything other than a legitimate medical purpose.
What about state legislatures? They could solve this problem if they chose to do so, or could they?
The Texas legislature, as you know, has taken a step recently to require that pain clinics be owned by physicians and that the physician actually be on site a certain amount of time. But again, I don't know that legislation is the key. Enforcement of the legislation that's on the books is the key. All the laws in the world are no good if they're not enforced.
If you had the CEO of one of the major wholesalers, one of the major distributors, one of the major middlemen, if you will, or the CEO of one of the big pharmaceutical companies who are making a ton of money out of this, what would you say to them?
I don't know that there's anything that I could say that wouldn't fall on deaf ears. And I just think it's the nature of the beast. And the beast is about making money, and making money at all costs.
Attorney Kay Van Way. Most states, not all but most, have a prescription drug monitoring program that prevents patients from going doctor to doctor and getting prescription pills. That's called doctor shopping. Florida, another state with a booming pill mill problem, now has legislation that they hope will put an end to doctor shopping. Similar legislation here in Texas goes into effect in 2010. You may want to check and see how your state is doing, keeping a close eye on the pill mills and doctor shopping. Up next, the new look of one of America's most famous streets. It's about transportation. It's all about getting everyone around faster. That story is next. Finally tonight, we leave Texas and head to the backyard of our New York City offices. We often travel the world to bring you reports, but last summer we couldn't help but notice that the core of the Big Apple was undergoing a tremendous transformation. Barriers were going up, traffic was being rerouted, and wide-eyed tourists and hard-bitten New Yorkers alike were walking around confused. What was going on? Amidst the canyons of skyscrapers and creeping daytime traffic, it may be hard to remember that for centuries, New York has been a world leader in how a metropolis moves people and goods. Its grid system of streets and avenues became a model for the design of a modern city. Its bridges proved mighty rivers were no longer boundaries of separation. And its extensive subway helped pioneer the novel notion that millions of people could move about quickly, unrestricted by the traffic above. Now, the woman in charge of New York's transportation thinks the city and the nation are long overdue for a new era of innovation.
I think that this country is lacking a vision for national transportation. We don't have a strategy. Up until now, it really has been just pouring out money without any kind of a specific goal.
Indemnification language you can put in here, and then
Jeanette Sadek-Khan is the commissioner of New York City's Department of Transportation. While there's plenty of work to be done in the office, her responsibilities extend to every corner of the city.
We have 6,000 miles of streets. We have 789 bridges. So it's fixing the potholes, it's handling 1 million street signs, it's dealing with 12,000 intersections. In some ways, I think the Department of Transportation is really the largest real estate developer in New York City. 6,000 miles of streets is a lot of streets.
But if Sadek-Khan has her way, those 6,000 miles of streets will never be the same. And nowhere has the look and feel of New York changed more than in the famous Times Square. It's called the crossroads of the world, and every day, 365,000 people pass through its tangle of streets and sidewalks. If you've ever been here in years past, you might be surprised by what's happening here today.
Just such a big change. It's just so pleasant and cozy, and it's just It's not as big of a madness that years ago. Like actually you can relax and just sit down. It's very nice. We love it.
I was here from 80 to 90. Huge difference. When I was here, Times Square was just awful. Now it's beautiful. I really like it. Great changes. I wish there was more of it, like, you know, other things in the city.
And Sadiq Khan is the woman who is responsible for the changes.
You can give more green time to drivers.
We first caught up with her this summer when her experiment for Times Square was just getting started.
So what we did right here is we basically closed off Broadway from 47th Street all the way to 42nd Street.
And made this what I'll call a concrete beach out of it.
And we've made this, yes, this is Broadway Beach. That's good. I haven't heard that before. And so we've created this incredible pedestrian plaza. This used to be Broadway. We would be standing in 3 lanes of traffic here. And all of this now is available for pedestrians. You know, people don't come to Times Square because they want to see traffic. People come to Times Square because they really want to see the bright lights of Broadway and sort of enjoy the city. And now Broadway is really able to take center stage in the way that it should. And you can actually sit down and look up and take in the wonder of the bright lights of Broadway in a way that you were never able to appreciate it before.
Blocking off Times Square for foot traffic is a pilot program that may become permanent after the new year. It's just one part of a much larger vision, the common vision of Sadiq Khan and New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg as they plan for the transportation needs of a growing New York.
The question is, what do we do to create a better New York City for the 8.4 million people that live here now and the million more people that are expected between now and 2030?
You and the mayor, you have a vision for the future. Dream with me a little bit.
Well, the vision is for a greater, greener New York City. And that means looking, from my perspective in transportation, at our streets in a whole new way.
But there are those who prefer the old way, especially some of the folks behind the wheels of those iconic yellow cabs. They've seen one of their favorite thoroughfares, Broadway, sealed off.
Before, the traffic was moving nice and smoothly. Until you put this, no matter where you go, all traffic jams. I just avoid this section. I stay on the Upper West Side or Lower East Side.
Well, if you've been in a taxi cab lately, as most of us have, you're bound to have heard the complaints. And I heard one yesterday, and this is not my language, it's the cab driver's language. He says, you know, the mayor has this crazy lady and she's blocked off part of Times Square and it's ruining traffic, making the city more congested.
Well, I have heard that,
I bet you
not
have.
surprisingly, with 12,000 cab drivers in New York City, lots of them going through Midtown Manhattan.
But Sadiq Khan is unwavering. And it's not just Times Square. A half-mile south at Herald Square in front of Macy's, the traffic of Broadway has become a park. Where once cabs honked and jockeyed for space, morning commuters now stop to sip coffee and read the paper. And as for her critics, Sadiq Khan says the street closings actually make traffic run smoother, fixing, she says, a centuries-old quirk in the layout of New York City.
For 200 years, Broadway has been this diagonal street that cut through the heart of Midtown Manhattan. And it's really an old colonial footpath. And so it was the only path that was left like that 200 years ago when the street grid system was created in New York City. And that's done some great things. It's created the great plazas, Times Square, Herald Square, Madison Square, Union Square. But every time that Broadway intersects through the network, it creates 3 intersections instead of 2. And so there are these congested pinch points every time Broadway cuts through the street grid system. And there's probably been gridlock for 200 years. There was probably ox cart gridlock that we don't know about that was there.
Well, it's not likely that ox carts will be making a comeback anytime soon. But Sadiq Khan is promoting another old-fashioned form of transportation. All throughout the city, streets are being carved up to make way for bicycles. They have their own lanes and even their own stoplights. Over the last 2 years, the city has added enough miles of bike lanes to stretch from New York to Boston.
We just finished the groundbreaking for our 200th bike lane mile.
And how many more miles are planned?
We're going to do 50 miles a year.
Indefinitely 50 miles a year?
That's the plan. We need to have a three-legged stool in our transportation network. We need to have an effective network for drivers, we need to have an effective network for transit riders, and we need to have an effective network for cyclists. And we also need to make sure that pedestrians are protected and celebrated, really, on the streets of New York. So we're doing everything we can, using every tool in our toolbox to use our streets to move people as effectively, as efficiently as possible.
But last year, Sadiq Khan and Mayor Bloomberg suffered a setback in one of their most ambitious plans to charge drivers to enter the center of Manhattan during the busiest times of day. It was called Congestion Pricing, based on a successful program in London. There was no political will for such a dramatic change. But Sadiq Khan believes its time will come.
It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Critics have called you a, quote, anti-car radical. True or untrue?
Untrue. It's not an anti-car philosophy. It's really about a mobility philosophy. You know, it helps drivers when we're able to take people out of their car and onto transit. It helps drivers when we're able to make it easier for people to get around by walking around.
How did you get involved with transportation to begin with?
Actually, my great-grandfather was an engineer on the DNRG, the Denver and Rio Grande, built the tracks between Denver and Salt Lake City. And I've been a New Yorker my whole life. So you can't walk out your door without touching transportation in some way, shape, or form. So, you know, I commuted on a bus with a bus pass going to school, and, you know, I've always loved the notion of how it is that people get around.
Sadiq Khan has spent her professional career in transportation policy, including a stint in the Clinton administration. She's had her current job for more than 2 years. She also serves as president of the National Association of City Transportation Officials, an organization committed to sharing good ideas and making urban transportation a national priority.
Metropolitan areas are where 80% of the American public lives, and it's where 75% of our GDP is generated. And yet, we do not get direct federal funding. And so we're looking for a different approach in terms of federal transportation policy. The other piece that we're doing is we're sharing what works and what doesn't in different cities. So if Portland's doing something interesting in terms of their bus program, it's easy for me to call the head of the Portland system and say, how did you do that? It's been really interesting to see how cities are learning from one another. We have a lot of visitors now coming to New York to see what it is that we're doing here. I go to other cities to learn what they're doing. I've taken a look at Copenhagen. I've taken a look at some of the innovations in Paris. I've even looked as far afield as Bogota, Colombia, to see, you know, what they've done. So, you know, I think that it's important to search to find innovative solutions. And of course, you know, New York is unique, so we always tailor them with New York in mind. So take a great idea, tailor it to fit the city of New York, and move forward from there.
What are the Chinese doing? They have an increasingly large urban population.
Yes.
Are they doing much that you're interested in?
Beijing just implemented a new bus rapid transit system that they have going, and I really believe that's a great opportunity for New York City. We've got the largest bus fleet in North America, and we've got the slowest bus speeds.
Bus rapid transit is an example of how cities around the world are learning from one another. Before it came to Beijing, it was pioneered in Bogota, Colombia. And now Sadiq Khan wants to bring it to New York.
The idea would be that you create a dedicated lane for buses that cars can't get into. Beautiful looking buses, they may look like subway cars, and they allow you to have the same kind of speeds that you get on the subway system.
Right now, it's just another dream for Sadiq Khan. But as she surveys the changes from the bike lanes to Times Square, she's confident that New York can lead the country and the world into a new era of transportation, one experiment at a time.
We're providing a place for people to rest their dogs and have a cup of coffee, catch up with a friend, you know, have an iconic place to meet. And it's been really interesting in all of the pilot programs that we've done and the street treatments that we've done. Virtually as soon as we roll the orange barrels into place to start a project, people instantly use the space. This, remember, is a pilot program. It's an experiment. And so
but everything you do is a pilot program.
It's true. I'm big on pilot programs because we've got to try new things. Right. We're an innovative city. We're the greatest city in the world. We've got to try new things.
And now a brief update on our broadcast about truckers and their training or lack of same. We've received a rig full of responses. We heard from the American Truckers Associations, the group that represents the thousands of trucking companies. A spokesperson said they did not believe the program was fair or balanced, and that the industry, along with federal government, was instituting new safety measures. But we received many emails like this. One former driver from Covenant Transport, one of the companies we profiled in our report, said of the company's self-described finishing school for new drivers, quote, "We saw people who weren't qualified to drive cars, let alone semi-trucks," unquote. Another wrote, quote, "As a veteran lady driver of over 27 years, I can only say good job, and it's about time someone did a story on the so-called truck driver training schools and the trucking companies that hire the students. Sadly, you've only glimpsed the tip of the iceberg." And finally this from another trucker. "Keep this story going. The public needs to know that the guys that move our goods around this great country are being treated less than animals." And we'll be following this story closely. We'll follow up, continue to investigate. We'll have much more in coming reports on Dan Rather Reports here on HDNet. But that's our program for tonight. From Austin, Texas, for HDNet, Dan Rather reporting. Good night. If you would like to add your name to an email list for information on upcoming programs, or if you would just like to send a question or comment, please email us at viewer@hd.net.